You know, when we think about great empires, our minds usually jump to legionaries and larger-than-life emperors, but behind all that is a machine, an invisible system of logistics, bureaucracy, and engineering that keeps the whole thing running. Today, we're going to pop the hood on one of the most incredible mechanisms in history, the system that solved a truly impossible problem. How do you feed a city of 1 million people using only ancient technology? We are talking about the Roman grain supply, the Annona.
So, at the very heart of the Roman Empire, you have this enormous, unprecedented problem. It's a problem of geography, and it's a problem of demographics. The city of Rome itself was a paradox, a megacity that, by all logic, really shouldn't have been able to exist where it did, at the scale that it did.
And this right here is the central puzzle of our explainer today. I mean, really think about this. Forget modern cargo ships, forget trains, forget refrigeration. We are talking about a world of sailing ships and ox carts. So how did Rome pull off a logistical feat of industrial scale using only pre-industrial tools?
To really get a handle on the scale, just look at this number. By the year 150 CE, Rome's population was somewhere around 1.2 million people. Now, to put that into perspective for you, no other city on Earth would get that big again for another 1,700 years. This wasn't just a big city, it was a demographic anomaly, a true monster of the ancient world.
And a city that big has a simply colossal appetite. To keep mass starvation at bay, Rome needed, at a bare minimum, 200,000 metric tons of grain every single year. That is an almost unimaginable amount of food. It's like the weight of almost 40,000 adult elephants.
But here's the real kicker, the thing that makes this problem so fascinating. The land immediately around Rome, it just wasn't very good for large-scale farming. It could only support about 200,000 people, which meant that for the other million citizens, pretty much every single bite of bread they ate had to be shipped in from far, far away. The city's survival depended entirely on this constant, long-distance logistical chain. It was a built-in vulnerability that the Roman state absolutely had to solve.
So how did they do it? What was the solution? Well, it wasn't just about simple trade. It was a massive, state-engineered machine, a complex system that we call the Annona.
Think of the Annona as the invisible architecture holding the city up. It wasn't just one thing. It was a totally integrated system of tax collection, subsidized shipping, gigantic ports and warehouses, and a whole bureaucracy to manage it all. Honestly, without the Annona, Rome would have starved to death in a few weeks.
So how did this incredible machine actually work? Well, we can break it down into 4 key stages, and we're going to follow the grain on its entire journey. First, how they got the grain. Second, how they moved it. Third, the incredible infrastructure built to handle it, and finally, how it actually got to the people of Rome.
Let's start right at the beginning of that supply chain. This journey doesn't begin in a market, but out in the fields of the empire's most productive provinces. Now, this is brilliant. The Roman state didn't buy most of this grain, it took it as taxes. Farmers in places like Egypt would pay their taxes in kind, that is, with grain, not money. This little piece of papyrus here, it's an actual tax receipt from back then. That grain was then loaded onto these huge specialized freighters. Now, the ships themselves were privately owned, but the state contracted them and gave them all sorts of incentives to do the job. This tax-in-kind system was the absolute bedrock of the whole operation. And the system relied on a few key breadbaskets to work. Egypt was the absolute superstar, providing a mind-boggling 150 to 200,000 tons a year. North Africa was a strong number 2. Sicily, which used to be Rome's main source, wasn't as important by the Imperial era, but it was still part of the network. This redundancy was one of the system's greatest strengths. It gave them a built-in buffer against a bad harvest or some political trouble in any one region.
So you might be asking, how do you convince a private ship captain to take on these incredibly dangerous sea voyages? Well, the state came up with a genius incentive program. It was basically insurance. If your ship sank in a storm, the state covered your losses. Emperor Claudius even offered full compensation for any ship lost during the dangerous winter sailing season, a risk almost no one would take otherwise. It was a perfect way to align private profit with public necessity. And make no mistake, these voyages were incredibly perilous. This map gives you just a tiny glimpse of the known Roman shipwrecks littering the Mediterranean floor. But here's the thing. The Annona operated on such a massive scale, with hundreds and hundreds of ships making the trip every year, that while losing a ship was a tragedy, the system as a whole could absorb those losses.
Okay, so the grain has survived the treacherous journey across the Mediterranean. But its journey isn't over. Now it faces a whole new set of challenges: getting unloaded, stored, and finally handed out to a million hungry people. And that required a whole other level of engineering and organization.
See, those huge grain freighters couldn't just sail up the Tiber River to Rome. It was too shallow, and the main port, Ostia, was constantly silting up. So Emperor Claudius launched one of the biggest engineering projects in the empire's history, Portus. This was an entirely artificial deep-water harbor, literally carved out of the coastline. It allowed dozens of ships to unload at once, safe from the open sea. It was the crucial gateway, a purpose-built solution to what was a critical bottleneck in the supply chain.
From Portus, the grain was barged upriver to Rome and stored in these colossal warehouses called horia. And look at the size of this one, the Horia Galba. It covered more than 225,000 square meters. It could hold 100,000 tons of grain. Just think about that. That's enough to feed the entire city for half a year. This strategic reserve was absolutely essential for political stability.
And finally, we get to distribution. The most famous part of this whole system was the grain dole. At its peak, 150,000 adult male citizens who were eligible got a monthly ration of grain completely free. Now, this wasn't just charity. It was a powerful political tool. It kept food prices stable for everybody, and more importantly, it kept the massive urban population happy and loyal. It was a way to prevent riots and chaos.
So this system, the Annona, it ran for something like 500 years. That's just a remarkable achievement of state engineering. But let's dig a little deeper. What were the core design principles that made it so resilient for so long? And just as importantly, what were its biggest weaknesses, the things that eventually caused it to fail?
Well, on the one hand, its strengths were clear. It had vertical integration, controlling the supply chain from the farmer's field right to the citizen's hand. It had redundancy, pulling from multiple regions. And it had massive state investment in infrastructure like Portus Gilles. But it also had some critical weaknesses. It was very vulnerable to the political chaos of the later empire. It had single points of failure, like that one crucial port, and its massive dependence on Egypt was a huge strategic gamble.
And this right here is where it all came crashing down. In the 5th century, when the Vandals conquered North Africa, they severed one of the main arteries of the Annona. And without that North African grain, the city of Rome just couldn't feed itself anymore. The population collapsed, plummeting from over 1 million people down to maybe 50,000. The impossible city became impossible once again.
All we're left with today are the bones of this magnificent machine. These ruins at Portus are a quiet, powerful reminder of the incredible logistical power that once held an empire's capital together.
And that really gets to the core of what we've been talking about. The glory of Rome, the power of the emperors, it wasn't just forged on the battlefield. It was built on the boring, meticulous, unglamorous work of bureaucrats and planners, making sure those grain ships arrived on time. At the end of the day, power isn't just about armies, it's about logistics.
And the story of the Annona really forces us to look in the mirror. Today, we are more dependent than ever on incredibly complex global supply chains for everything. Our food, our fuel, our technology. The Romans proved that a sophisticated system can work for centuries, but they also showed us just how quickly it can all fall apart when one critical piece breaks. So the question I want to leave you with is this: what are the invisible systems propping up our world today, and just how fragile are they?